Before we begin today's episode, I want to talk about strength training. Most runners love to run. We love the miles, we love the races, we love the finish lines. We love seeing how far and how fast our bodies can go. But many runners avoid strength training. Maybe we think we don't have enough time. Maybe we don't know where to start. Maybe we think lifting weights will make us bulky or slow us down. The truth is that strength training isn't about becoming a bodybuilder. It isn't about becoming a stronger runner. I once heard a story about a runner who kept getting injured every single year. He would train hard, build fitness, sign up for races, then something would happen, a sore knee, a strained calf, Achilles pain. Every season ended the same way. Finally, a coach challenged him to spend just 20 minutes twice a week strength training. Not 2 hours, not 6 days a week, just 20 minutes. At first, he didn't think it would matter. But after a few months, something amazing happened. He wasn't just getting stronger in the gym. He was getting stronger on the roads. His posture improved. His stride became more efficient. The little aches and pains started disappearing. And for the first time in years, he made it through an entire training cycle without an injury. The lesson is simple. Running makes you tired. Strength training makes you durable. If you want to start strength training, here are 3 simple ways to build the habit. Number 1, start small. Don't commit to an hour-long workout. Commit to 10 minutes. Success builds on momentum. Number 2, attach it to a run. After an easy run, do a few squats, lunges, calf raises, and planks. Make strength training part of your running routine. And number 3, focus on consistency, not perfection. 2 workouts every week for a year will change your running far more than 1 perfect month followed by quitting. Remember, nobody becomes strong overnight. Strength is built 1 workout at a time, 1 rep at a time, 1 decision at a time. And just like running, the biggest rewards come to those who show up consistently. So today, let's learn how to become stronger, healthier, and more resilient runners. Let's get started. Welcome back to Running Miles with Heart Disease CHD. I'm your host and coach, Josh. Today, I'm excited to welcome a guest whose work has helped thousands of runners stay healthy, get stronger, prevent injuries, and reach goals they never thought possible. Joining us today is Jason Fitzgerald, founder of Strength Running, host of Strength Running podcast, author, USATF-certified running coach, and a 2-hour and 39-minute marathoner for more than a decade. Jason has been one of the most trusted voices in the running community, helping runners train smarter, race faster, and most importantly, stay healthy enough to enjoy the sport for years to come. What I appreciate most about Jason's approach is that he doesn't just focus on running more miles. He focuses on building stronger, more resilient athletes through intelligent training, strength work, injury prevention, and long-term consistency. His philosophy has helped countless runners spend less time injured and more time doing what they love. As someone with congenital heart disease who loves running, I'm always fascinated by people who help others unlock their potential. Running has a way of teaching us lessons that extend far beyond the finish line. It teaches discipline, patience, resilience, and confidence. Jason has dedicated much of his career to helping runners discover exactly what they're capable of. Today, we're going to talk about strength training, injury prevention, smart training, common mistakes runners make, and how to stay consistent for the long haul, and what it really takes to become a stronger, healthier runner. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to learning from you personally, helping our listeners learn from your experience, and hopefully inspiring more people to pursue their goals with confidence. Welcome to the podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, Jason, before strength training became one of the most respected resources in the running world, who was Jason Fitzgerald as a young runner, and how did your journey into coaching begin?
Oh man, the $1 million question. Yeah, I got started with running as a freshman in high school. I was the kid who showed up to cross country practice wearing knee length mesh shorts and basketball shoes, thinking that I was going to high jump because cross country was like track. I very quickly learned that there was just a lot of running involved, but thankfully, I really enjoyed the coach and the guys on the team. And, I got some early wins in my running career. So before strength running, I was still a very much running obsessed young runner. I was the guy who ran cross country, indoor track, outdoor track, all 4 years of my high school career. I went on to Connecticut College and I did the same there, ran 3 seasons for all 4 years. And that's where I really fell in love with the training process, training theory, and exercise physiology, and just understanding the why behind what we were doing. Why are we running a lactate threshold workout? What is that actually doing for me? Why are we doing it now at this point of the season as opposed to at this point of the season over here? Like, is there some rhyme or reason to this? And I feel like the college experience I had was living through the running books that you can now buy. So I love picking up a running book and reading through like all the chapters on periodization and power development and boosting your aerobic development and all that. And I love just mapping it to my personal experience because that's what I lived through. And, I always knew that I wanted to be involved in the running world just because I loved the sport so much. It had given me so much. And at the time, when I was a younger guy, I really thought the only way to do that was I either need to be a pro runner or I need to be the coach to pro runners, or maybe I could be like a high school or college coach. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a high school coach because you usually have to be a high school teacher or have another job. I wasn't sure if that was the path for me. And eventually I learned, hey, maybe I can coach runners virtually. And that's really where strength running was born, was with a desire to coach runners, to help them accomplish their goals. So I set up strengthrunning.com in 2010. Actually, I started it in 2009 as just a static website. There was nothing there. It was like 3 or 4 pages, and all I heard was crickets. Nobody ever emailed me. Nothing happened at all. And I realized that I needed to create some content, to start getting some eyeballs, to start letting people know that, hey, I actually know what I'm talking about when it comes to running. And that's where strength running was really born in 2010. And it's really grew and blossomed since then, and is giving me opportunities to come on podcasts like this.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Um, that's great. What's the biggest misconception runners have about strength training? I think, me personally, I used to think, maybe, you should strength train by doing, 15 reps, right? Maybe do less weight. That way I don't get injured, especially during the training season. How do you kind of direct your athletes to do heavy lifting when there's a chance of injury if they're an older athlete?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think whenever you're approaching any training intervention that has risks, whether that's a fast workout or a long run or lifting a somewhat heavy weight, we've got to get there in an intelligent way. But I think when we understand like what strength training does for runners, we can really appreciate why we lift a certain way. So you're right. I think some of the biggest misconceptions are, I'm going to go lift for endurance. So you go and you lift 15 to 20 repetitions. You do very high volume of low weight. Uh, the problem with that is that we get enough of an endurance stimulus through our running. And we get a very running specific endurance stimulus when we're running because, after all, we're running. But when we're doing that with weightlifting, we're really not helping our body get too many physiological benefits from that kind of a lifting approach. Certainly we can work on a little bit of muscular endurance. I think there are better ways of working on more specific muscular endurance, like maybe doing some downhill running at the end of a long run, for example. But when we're in the gym, our training goals are very specific. Like, number one, yes, we want to get stronger. And so if you want to get stronger, you have to lift a certain way. You don't lift for endurance with high reps, a lot of volume, and you don't lift like a bodybuilder whose goal isn't necessarily to get stronger, it's to gain size. The goal is hypertrophy. And what they do is they still lift heavy, but they also do a lot of volume. They do some lighter weightlifting, and their workouts are like 2 hours long. We're endurance runners. We don't need to spend 2 hours in the weight room. And I'll be the first one to say, look, I know I'm the coach that talks a lot about strength training. I don't even really like strength training that much. I'd rather be out there running. Like, that's my passion. I love that. But I just understand that strength training allows me to do more of the thing that I love. And if you're lifting heavy, you are gaining strength in the most efficient and effective way possible in the weight room. You're also lifting in a way that's going to have the best impact, positive impact on your running economy, or how efficiently, you can move from point A to point B. And so if you're getting stronger, if you're boosting your running economy, you're also reducing your injury risk by, gaining stronger muscles and tougher joints and connective tissues. All your ligaments and tendons and even bones are getting stronger and more durable through the act of heavy weightlifting. So you're going to reduce your injury risk. You're going to run more economically. You're probably more likely to be at your target body weight and not, kind of be at a body composition that would hurt your running. So there's so many different things to love about strength training. And when we recognize that they really do stem from heavier weightlifting, then it's a good idea to optimize for heavier weightlifting. Now, the injury concern, I think, is probably a little bit overblown. Like, I'm more concerned about injuries with running than I am with weightlifting. Running is one of the riskiest sports in existence when it comes to getting yourself hurt. So the runners who will go run 50 miles in a week or train for a marathon and do these 20-mile long runs, but are scared to lift heavy, I just think have the risk reward ratio all off. The running is the thing that's going to get you hurt, not the weightlifting, especially if you're approaching it in a more methodical way, right? Just like you shouldn't go out and run 20 miles if you've never done anything close to that, or go on the track and do a really hard VO2 max workout without getting there first, without building the capacity to get there. We have to do the same with weightlifting. We should, ideally periodize our weightlifting just like we're periodizing our running, right? There's a base phase. We're building general capacity. And then we might do a little bit of speed work just to kind of get the neuromuscular side of things online, really build the coordination for running fast. And then we get to easier workouts. And then finally, those really hard workouts. We can do the same thing with weightlifting. We can build a foundation first with moderate weights. We can add in a little bit of intensity. And then later on in the season, when we're getting ready for our peak performance in whatever goal race we might be training for, then we're much more likely to be doing, more explosive lifts, the really heavy lifts that you're probably thinking about. Those have their place, but they certainly don't need to be in your program for every weight room session that you do for the entire season. So as long as your weightlifting is periodized, you're not doing those really heavy lifts every single time you're in the gym, and you're strategically building to that over time, you're going to be in a really good position to not get injured and build extra injury resilience through that work in the weight room.
Okay. And would you recommend I guess like 5 to maybe 7 reps of heavy weight, or if you're not doing the 10 to 15 or the 15 to 20 reps, is that something you mostly recommend?
So I think because weightlifting should be periodized so that you're kind of building the correct capacities in the weight room, there's a place for almost any rep scheme. Like at the beginning when you're building that kind of general foundation, I think, 3 sets of 10 is a good idea. Now, as you start doing more explosive exercises, as you start increasing the weight, you're going to have to decrease the volume, right? When we go run hard workouts on the track, it's not for 20 miles. We're going to run a much lower distance at those fast paces. Same thing in the weight room. We're going to lift for far fewer repetitions with the heavier weight. So at the beginning of the season, it might be 3 sets of 10. In the middle of the season, it might be, something like 4 sets of 6. And then at the end of the season, it might be like, 4 sets of 2 to 3, because after a warm up set, we're really just kind of focused on being close to our 1 rep max. This is like doing a workout where maybe you're running 200 to 300 meter repetitions pretty quickly, but you're giving yourself a lot of rest. You're really focused on the rhythm of it, running fast. Same thing with the weightlifting. Like we want good recovery. We don't want the volume to be too high, but we want the weight to be fairly high. And so you can kind of see how over the course of the season, we're going from lighter to heavier. We're going from more general to specific, easier to more advanced. So you can see there's a lot of parallels here with running.
Okay, yeah. Um, do you kind of do like, I remember doing P90X back in the 2000s when I was a little bit younger, and they would do different workouts every maybe 30 days to kind of trick the muscles. Do you introduce new workouts for the athletes every 30 days or whatnot to, um, I
No,
guess,
I wouldn't necessarily go that route for runners, just because um, I think the whole idea of like muscle confusion has been largely dispelled in
okay.
the literature, because you sort of need your muscles, your body to adapt to something, right? And it's sort of like how our mileage creeps up gradually over time. If we were just running random mileages to confuse our muscles, like would probably just end up getting hurt. Now, with that said, there's of course a place for variety. Um, I would not optimize for variety just for variety's sake, just a whole bunch of new exercises, because that really starts to interfere with progressive overload. We do want to stick to a variety of, say, 5 to 10 exercises and do those consistently. And having a smaller amount of variety allows us that progressive overload so that we can run, or I'm sorry, we can lift a certain amount of weight this week. And then 3 weeks later, we can lift a little bit more weight. 3 weeks after that, we can lift a little bit more weight. But if we were doing all different kinds of exercises, we wouldn't really have the ability to progressively overload our system with gradually more weight or more volume of that same exercise.
Okay. And like, I can just imagine when, you're deep in the training for maybe a marathon or an ultra, um, you're going to want to run more. And then it's like, well, I only have so much time for maybe a workout or for running, right? So, you know, um, do you just try to maintain your muscle at that point and you just do maybe one strength workout during the week, or do you try to build your strength muscles and maybe go for maybe 3 workouts per week for
I
the
think
strength
runners
training?
are best served with like 2 weightlifting sessions a week where you're in the gym lifting weight. Um, it probably would underserve the athlete to reduce it to one. I'm not sure if that's enough of a stimulus to, ensure that you're still getting all these amazing benefits of lifting weights that we've been talking about. I think a lot of it comes down to, I mean, of course, the time issue is a big one. Like I've got 3 kids. I understand training is not everyone's number one goal or their job. Most runners are not elites, right? Training full time. I would love that, but no one's going to pay me to do that. Um, so a big part of being able to lift throughout hard running training, like let's say you're training for a marathon, it is making sure that the lifting is appropriate. So this is where the periodized weightlifting program can be really helpful. because it takes into consideration what you're doing outside of the gym. It takes your running into consideration. I think the other big part of this is making sure that your lifting workouts are scheduled appropriately. Like if you are lifting the day before a long run, that's probably not a great idea because you're going to be carrying in all this soreness and general fatigue into like one of your most important workouts of the week, which is the long run, especially if you're a marathoner. If you're a half marathoner, a marathoner, or beyond, the long run is probably the most important training session of the week. So when it comes to that long run, even when it comes to your faster workout of the week, it's probably not a good idea to interfere with that by putting a lifting session the day before. A lot of coaches will recommend lifting after that key session. So you might do your long run or your workout, and then either right afterward, after you have a snack and you hydrate and stuff like that, you can get into the weight room, or you can do it later in the day after you've had a little bit of time to recover and eat a good meal. That is an option, although I will say it's an advanced option. You're making your hard days really hard. You're just putting a lot of hard work into these hard days. And so some runners, they can handle that. I think that's a good idea if you can handle it. But kind of the middle of the road option that I find works best for most athletes is let's lift on a moderate day. And so what that does is it still maintains your easy days and a total recovery or just off day from training. So you're still going to get good recovery when you need it. And you're still going to have your hard running days that are being prioritized. And then, your medium days, you're just making a little bit harder. So I think that trade-off is worth it when it comes to, how we figure out how to get your weightlifting days in during the training week. Then the final thing I'll say is fueling. A lot of the reason why runners struggle with cross training and, long runs and weightlifting, in addition to all the other running that they're doing, is just because they're not fueling appropriately. So if you're going to be adding in, say, 2 hours of weightlifting to your training week, 1 hour, 2 different times, you probably have to eat a lot more. You probably have to think a little bit more about, going in not carb depleted into that session and then refueling with a good amount of protein in a way that runners probably don't historically think about fueling. And all of a sudden now we have to think a little bit more about protein, because that's going to help us with the muscle damage. It's going to help us rebuild our muscles faster from the micro trauma that we've experienced. So, those are some ideas that I usually think about when it comes to like, how do I figure out how to get this weightlifting in during hard training?
Okay. And would you recommend like creatine as a supplement for marathoners? I know there's a lot of noise with creatine in the running community where maybe there's a myth that you can gain weight, which it does kind of hold water weight a little bit, but maybe it's just a pound, it's not that much. But people still, I think it still has that stigma where people think they're going to gain, 5, 10 pounds if they take creatine. But how is it helping the athletes? I guess muscle produce.
Yeah, I think creatine is probably a good idea for most runners. There's going to be the minority of people who have some GI distress, even with the standard recommendation of like 5 grams per day, which is the standard supplement uh, uh, requirement that they have. But I did a deep dive with an exercise physiologist on my own podcast about creatine and sort of like what it does to runners and whether or not it's worth it. So a couple points. Number one, it is definitely not some panacea that's going to cure all your problems. And because of that, it's kind of like a low level supplement. It has a lot of very small benefits. It's probably a good idea to take because of those small benefits and because there's very little drawback to taking creatine. It is one of the most studied supplements on the planet, sort of like caffeine. It's safe, besides a little GI distress among a minority of the population. But that's usually more at the 10, 15, 20 gram levels. I have personally taken 20 grams once to combat some fatigue because I didn't sleep well one night. And it's actually quite good at replacing some of the fogginess that you have when you don't sleep well. But let's just leave it at, yes, there is some GI distress at the higher levels. Um, Creatine does also help you retain a little bit of water weight. So yeah, you might gain 1 or 2 pounds, but it's water weight. It's like not real weight. I wouldn't really worry about that as a runner. It's not the thing that's really going to uh, you know negatively impact your performances. But because of all like the small low level benefits that you have, like you potentially have better muscle protein synthesis. There are some cognitive benefits to taking creatine as well. Uh, I'm not well versed on every single benefit of taking creatine, but it is something generally safe, generally effective, with very few drawbacks. So I do think it's a good idea. It's also
Okay.
pretty cheap too. So there's that.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it on sale a couple of times in the Costco. So definitely a lower price for what it can do. That's pretty amazing. Um, what do you say to your athletes? Like if an athlete wanted like 5 workouts to do in the weight room, what would you recommend them doing? What's your top 5 for strength training? Do you,
Yeah,
do
it's a
you
good
recommend?
question.
Oh,
I'm not sure I really have like 1 or 2 specific workouts. Like I would say, don't try to get too fancy. Like you're not a power lifter, you're not a bodybuilder. This is not your primary sport. You don't have to do crazy stuff that you see on Instagram or YouTube that is probably more of an injury risk. And it certainly looks cool on video, but it's not really going to give you too much as an athlete. I would focus on the fundamentals, focus on the basic exercises like, the squat, the deadlift, an overhead press. I really like an overhead press because it's an upper body exercise, but you do it while you're standing up. So it makes it a little bit more running specific. Bench press is another good one. You don't really have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to the exercises that you do. Now, of course, all those exercises have, half a dozen different variations of that of that exercise. And I think there's value in those variations as well. Doing a single leg deadlift versus a more traditional deadlift, doing a Romanian straight leg deadlift. All of these have their place and have their value. So and also sort of because I think weightlifting should be periodized over time. It's sort of like, what's your favorite running workout? Like I'm a little bit agnostic. I think there's a time and a place for all of them if they fit with the runner's goals, if they fit with the time of the season that we're in. There's probably a place for intervals and hill work and threshold work and race specific workouts. And the same is true in the weight room. There's a time for doing a 60-minute general strength workout where you're not doing anything explosive. And then there's a time for a 35-minute kind of tight workout where you might be lifting kind of heavy and doing some explosive work, but the volume's really low and you're in and out of there in 30, 40 minutes. So yeah, I'm a little bit agnostic to the certain types of workouts and exercises, but definitely just keep it simple. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And if you can, just find like a really good program out there that's written by like a coach you trust. Because I think in favor of not reinventing the wheel, you can kind of just follow in the footsteps of people who have already figured this out before you.
yeah. And how have you stayed not injured for so many years?
Yeah, I used to be quite injury prone. If you go back to my college days, and even a couple years post collegially, I was always hurt with pretty
Oh,
much every running injury that you can imagine. It's part of the price of really pushing yourself and trying to achieve. And the injuries are sort of the price I paid for some of the PRs that I was able to run. But post collegiately, I ran my first marathon and had an IT band syndrome injury that took me out for like 6 months. I saw a whole bunch of physical therapists. And eventually, when I started getting healthy and starting to run again, I knew that like my training needed to change. I couldn't keep doing what I had been doing when I was 20 years old. I was now in my late 20s. And so that's when I started, a whole couple things. Like, I started doing a dynamic warm up before all of my runs. That added in a whole new movement practice into my training and really helped me feel ready for the run. I also started doing, some kind of strength or core work after each one of my runs. I know we've been talking a lot about weightlifting in the gym, but, if anybody's ever been to a physical therapist, a lot of those isolation exercises and smaller body weight exercises are really good at keeping you healthy. And if you were to do 10, 15, 20 minutes of that after each one of your run, I think that goes a long way at keeping you healthy. Not just because you're getting stronger, but you're sort of activating your muscles in a different way. You're practicing different ranges of motion that, you'll never experience as a runner. Because let's be honest, running is a fairly two-dimensional sport. You're kind of just trying to run fast, straight ahead the whole time. And, that from a physical perspective, that's kind of boring. So we need that movement practice to keep us healthy. And it also helps with coordination, just feeling more generally athletic, which I think is helpful. So that was two big changes I made to my training. And this is something I recommend for all runners, like just sandwich your run in between that dynamic warm up and the post run core and strength work. And, I made changes to like small changes to a whole bunch of different things that I used to do. Like I stopped running 3 faster days per week and went to 2. I slowed down some of my easy runs and made sure that I had one weekly run where it was a short, slower recovery run. And I had a dedicated day where that was really easy. And once I wasn't chasing so much intensity, I started building more strength. I started recovering a little bit more on my easy days with a slower pace. That's where things really started clicking for me and, got healthy from that long-term injury. I was able to run a big PR in the marathon and have much more success in the longer distances. So it was definitely worth it, but it was certainly a learning process.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Um, what's the biggest misconception runners have about strength training?
Probably that they don't have to do it.
Oh,
or that they can do like any kind of strength training. I mean, look, I think anything is better than nothing. So whatever you're doing, you're better than the person who's not doing anything. But I also think that a little bit of strategy, a little bit of a methodical approach to strength training can make a world of difference. So, I like to call this like the grab bag approach to strength training, or like you're at a party with appetizers and you're just sampling. Oh, sure, I'll go to the body pump class at the gym this week. And then, well, I went rock climbing earlier, so I don't really need a strength workout. But, next week I'm definitely going to go in the gym. And you're sort of just bouncing all over the place. This is much more common than you would think. And it's really hard to get any kind of progressive overload when you're just doing a whole bunch of random stuff. You're never like increasing your mileage or increasing the weight on a certain lift or running the same workout a little bit faster this time. You're never actually improving on something. You're just doing new stuff all the time. Now, look, if you don't want to become a better runner and you're not trying to be methodical about your strength training, this sounds really fun to me. You're sampling all these different forms of exercise, and that sounds fun. But for the runner who does want to improve, maybe they want to kind of see what they can do as a runner, they want to glimpse their potential. I think that strategy, that methodical approach, following an actual program is a really smart idea. So yeah, biggest misconception, and I had this as myself as a younger runner. I don't have to do it. I get enough strength in my legs from running, from hill workouts, from speed. But like we talked about, the benefits you get from strength training hopefully alleviate some of these misconceptions.
okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing. How has your strength training changed from your 30s to your 40s?
Yeah, well, I probably lift maybe twice a week now
Okay.
and do some body weight work, kind of like how I described. I try to practice what I preach. It doesn't always work out, but I'm also not training as hard as I once was. I'm not running the 85 miles a week like I used to. So I don't think I need as much of that stimulus. But I would say that the biggest change for me is actually adding in the heavier weights. Like, so I had been sandwiching my runs. I had been doing that body weight strength training for a long time, and that includes like a medicine ball. I included some band work. A lot of runners are familiar with, you get an exercise band and you put it around your ankles or right above your knees, and you can do a whole variety of exercises that give you a little bit of resistance. So I had been doing that for a very long time. And it wasn't until maybe 4 or 5 years ago that I started being more consistent with lifting weights. And I think that was a big change. And it wasn't actually for a running reason. It was because I just wanted to put on a little bit more weight, a little bit more muscle. I'm kind of your stereotypical cliche distance runner. You can push me over by breathing on me too hard. And I realized as I was getting into my 40s, I'm a little worried about sarcopenia when I get older. I'm a little worried about being frail, even though like I'm still a decent athlete at this age. I do want to be a little bit sturdier, a little bit more durable. So for me, I think if you're a master's athlete in your 40s and 50s, whether you're a man or a woman, then weightlifting does take on a more important role for reasons outside of running, right? It's not just for running performance. It's so that, you have the mobility and the strength to get down on the floor and play with your grandkids in 20 years. So I'm trying to think very long term about these things and do things not just for my running, but also for my general health and my longevity over time. So yeah, the garage gym that I've put in my house has been a big investment, and it's totally worth it.
Yeah, it definitely saves you time, right? From going to the health club or whatnot.
Yeah, that's always a big drawback or a pro to having your home gym is very convenient.
Yes. Would you recommend foot exercises to your athletes?
That is an interesting question. I think if you went back 15 years ago, a lot of distance runners were training their feet. They were prioritizing foot strength, and they were doing it in a lot of different ways. They were probably doing a little bit of barefoot running, but they were also running in racing spikes and racing flats, and they were running workouts in these racing shoes. Now, in 2026, nobody's wearing flats anymore. Even the racing spikes look a lot different than they used to. And almost no one is running barefoot anymore. We're now in the super shoe era of very high stack heights and basically putting a giant foam block underneath your feet, which does really help you run faster. There's no denying that. But there is a problem with it, sort of, like the carbon plate in super shoes takes the place of the natural spring of your foot. And so if you are running a lot in super shoes and you're neglecting your feet, there's definitely some atrophy that's going to go on. And, I'd be very cautious about doing a lot of training in super shoes and not doing any kinds of foot strengthening activity. So I think some, very general, toe yoga, foot strength, kind of things is a good idea. But then I also think being in uh, being barefoot or in zero drop shoes occasionally for small periods of time is a good idea. So when you're at home, take your shoes off. You can even take your socks off. You can just be barefoot. I think that's really good for your overall foot health. If you are doing any kind of mobility work, core or strength work, maybe at a gym if you're in a dedicated like kind of like a yoga studio or something like on a mat. But certainly if you're at home, do that barefoot. You're going to be moving around and doing certain exercises barefoot. That has value. And then I think in your casual shoes, it might be helpful to have like a zero drop shoe in your shoe rotation so that, maybe once or twice a week you go for a short walk in a zero drop shoe, or you need to go out and run a couple errands. So you just kind of driving around, stopping at a couple stores or the post office or whatever in zero drop shoes. It gives you a little bit more exposure to stretching out your Achilles, your soleus, and your calves in the most neutral way possible. I also think there's, like I am showing my age here, but I think there's a little bit of a place for some barefoot running. Now, much less than what we used to do back in the day. Like I tried to do 20 minutes of barefoot running a week along with doing all my strides barefoot. We don't have to go that hard, but if you were to do 4 strides on a synthetic turf field or on some soft grass twice a week barefoot, I think there's a lot of value in that. Now, if you do 4 100-meter strides twice a week, we're talking about a half a mile of barefoot running. But because they are strides, they are quicker, they're faster, you're going to get more out of this barefoot running than if you just did a half mile of just very easy jogging barefoot. So, maybe start with 2 barefoot, just see how it feels. Then a week later, you do 4, and then like 5 days later, you do another 4, and you very gradually onboard a few sessions of barefoot strides during the week. Then I think you're going to be getting all the benefits of being barefoot, right? Just better foot athleticism and strength, more comfort in a more neutral position. And then the other side to it is like, it does help with your running economy and your mechanics. So if you're a very aggressive heel striker, doing barefoot strides is going to help correct that and give you a more neutral type of foot strike that is probably much more efficient for you. Now, of course, you're going to go back to a little bit of a heel strike once you put your shoes on. But if you do this for years, and yes, this is a very long-term project, you're gradually going to become a more efficient runner because of that practice. So there's a lot to like here. I think foot strength is probably underserved in the running community, but probably we should think about it a little bit more because of the super shoe, era that we're in.
Yeah. So do you recommend a 10 millimeter drop? Or I guess each runner would be different, but do you, I guess just a neutral from like 5 to maybe an 8 millimeter drop, probably somewhere around there? Or because I guess after, I read the book Born to Run, I think in the 2000s, and I think a lot of people were pretty, maybe obsessed with maybe zero drop back then when that book came out. But what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I was one of those people.
Oh,
Not zero drop all the time, but
yeah.
like, did I go hiking in Vibram Five Fingers? Yes, I did. Not incredibly proud to say that, but nevertheless, full transparency. I don't think there's a particular heel toe drop that is universal that every runner is going to enjoy. I prefer a 4 to 8 millimeter heel toe drop. I probably a little bit on the lower side for some runners. 4 to 6 millimeters might be a little bit too low. But again, I have been running workouts in racing spikes and flats and did a lot of barefoot stuff in my younger days, and I still wear zero drop shoes. I glanced over earlier, I can see my zero drop shoes on the other side of the room. So, I think I'm probably a little bit more capable of running in a lower drop shoe. And to be clear, lower drop doesn't mean better, right? Like the drop on your shoes is sort of like different workouts. There's a time and a place for all of them. Let's think of them as tools, right? So if you're going to be on your feet for a long time, you're doing like a 3-hour trail run or something like that, you might want an 8, 10, maybe even 12 millimeter heel toe drop, because it's going to put less stress on the Achilles. But the next day you might go for a walk in zero drop shoes, and then the day after that you do a recovery run in 8 millimeter drop shoes, and the next day you do a workout in 4 millimeter drop shoes. So there's a place for everything. I'd say most runners are probably going to be comfortable around the 6 to 12 drop range, with 6 maybe being a little small and 12 maybe being a little bit high. So we could condense that. Maybe 8 to 10 millimeter drop is going to be your sweet spot for most runners. But I'm kind of agnostic on this too. I think do what works for you. Think of it as a tool, and a little bit of variety here, I think, is a good thing.
Okay, great. And I know what would you recommend for runners like warming up? Like I guess would you recommend static stretching, or would you recommend dynamic stretching? And do you stretch?
Yeah, I love it. It's like the little gotcha at the end. I do a little bit of static stretching. Now, static stretching should not be done before your run. It doesn't help you warm up, and it actually has a slightly higher injury risk than you just not doing anything before the run. So the warm up process has to literally warm you up. If it doesn't warm you up, literally, it's not a good warm up. So depending on what kind of a run you have planned, I think the more intense the run, a workout or a race, the bigger the warm up, the longer the warm up, the more complicated the warm up should be. If you're just going for a long run or another easy run, I really do think it's a good idea to continue to sandwich your runs in between that dynamic warm up at the beginning, which is mostly a series of light strength exercises and dynamic flexibility movements, and also some drills you can put in there. So if you're doing that, doesn't have to be a long time. Maybe on the short side, it's 5 minutes. Maybe on the long side, it's 15 minutes, but generally about 10 is probably your sweet spot. This is gonna literally warm you up. It's gonna increase your heart rate. It's gonna increase your respiration. You're gonna expand your ranges of motion. You're gonna lubricate your joints. Because your heart rate's pumping a little bit stronger and you're breathing harder, you're going to start really expanding all those capillary beds, especially in your extremities, like your feet, which is important as runners. And it's really just kind of getting you metabolically ready to start running. And so a lot of runners who have never done a dynamic warm up, the first thing they're going to think is, wow, this is a workout in and of itself. I'm tired. And then once you get used to it, give it like 2 or 3 weeks, it won't really make you tired anymore. And you'll realize that the first, 2 kilometers, mile or so of your run, you just feel a lot better. Maybe you are running 5, 10, 15 seconds a mile faster for that first mile at the same effort, at the same heart rate, just because you're a little bit more warmed up. You're moving further along on that warm up process. Now, if you're running a workout, I would say your warm up has to be more than just the dynamic warm up. So we're talking about, yes, do the dynamic warm up, same one you do before an easy run, that's fine. But then the first couple miles, you're sort of onboarding yourself to intensity. So you might run a 2-mile warm up where you start really slow, and maybe the last minute or two is a little bit more up tempo. Then you might do a series of drills. Maybe you do a couple of strides. Then you're ready for that workout. So you can see how the more intense training session, the workout, has a more, involved warm-up process, because you really want your body, kind of ready and able to run fast and hard right away. Sort of like if you're racing a short middle distance event, like let's just say the mile, you need to be running really fast as soon as the gun goes off. There's no opportunity to warm up during the race like you would in a marathon. Most people don't run before a marathon. You kind of just, you get warmed up in the first few miles. Well, in the mile, or even a 2-mile or a 5K, you need to be right on pace right away. And you need to be breathing hard, sweating, already feeling like you've done some running and some work on the starting line of that race. So it does depend a little bit on the type of run that you're doing, but I do think that 10-minute dynamic warm-up is great, because running is so two-dimensional, because especially as older runners, as adults, we need that movement practice to stay athletic, to be able to move well into our older age. So that's how I would think about warming up.
Okay. And I guess I wanted to ask, what are some habits that maybe runners can form to save them time?
Oh man, that's a good question. Time-saving running habits. Um, I think it all maybe starts with like your nightly routine, because if you can be consistent with going to bed at a reasonable hour, you're going to be able to get up at a reasonable hour, and that's arguably the best time for your training, especially if you have a family. Um, I used to take advantage of my lunch hour when I had a 9 to 5 job, and I would occasionally be able to run, a second run during my lunch hour, or I would do that easy recovery day run during that lunch hour when I wasn't running as much and I didn't need more than an hour. So using that period of time is really effective. I've coached a lot of parents who put their kids to bed and then they go out running at nighttime. That's personally not for me. I'm not much of a night runner. That's my wind down time. But if it works for you, that's great. So there's like the bigger high level things. I mean, if you have any more specific questions about like how to save time, happy to go into more detail. One of the things that I found is that runners often struggle to get in all the extras. the dynamic warm up, the strength training, going to the gym and lifting. So that's where I think like, running strides in the last mile of your run instead of after the run is a viable strategy to save 5 minutes. Having a home gym and investing in that is a way to save on commuting to the gym and all the transition time wasting costs of that. So that's another strategy that you can use. But, one of the things that I have unfortunately come to the conclusion about when it comes to distance running and endurance running is that when you're talking about endurance training, you can't really save time with it because it requires an investment of time. So that is just something I've come to the conclusion about. Like, we can talk about all the time saving tips in the world, but at the end of the day, you need an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours or whatever it might be for your run. And there's no way to get around that, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense.
I
Um,
was thinking about adopting my kids, Josh, but I don't know if that's a viable strategy.
yeah.
I'm joking. I'm joking.
So I wanted to go into nutrition a little bit, and I mean, if you've ever been on the internet before, everybody says everything about everything and every kind of lifestyle there's imagined, whether that's being plant-based and the plants are killing you, or being meat only, and it's the best thing that they've ever done, and they've healed all these magical diseases. Um, it's hard to pinpoint the best nutrition, but through my journey, I started out doing learning about whole foods and I guess the ketogenic diet. Um, but then that didn't really work out for me, and I kind of went back to plant-based and kind of have the sense of eating like 40 whole foods and stuff like that. Just more variety in a sense and more fiber. But I didn't know if you talk about that when you're coaching your athletes, or what do you recommend for your athletes?
With a full disclosure that I'm not a dietitian,
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of dietitians and I've studied what elite runners do. And so my suggestion to runners is do what the best do, unless you have a particular food intolerance or allergy or ethical or medical reason to eat a certain way. So if that's you, then do that. But if you don't have an allergy or a very specific reason to adhere to a certain diet, and you're just interested in being healthy and optimizing your running and making sure that you don't succumb to red S or something like that, then I think we should just eat like the pros. And none of them follow a formal diet whatsoever. They all eat pretty much every food. Yes, they try to focus on whole foods and getting their fiber and micronutrients and all that stuff, but they're also more interested in ensuring they are adequately fueled. So they will go out and get the bacon cheeseburger with fries. That's not a problem, especially if you just ran 20 miles that day. You need the calories, you need all that sustenance to keep you healthy and well fueled and recovered for your next training session. Um, yeah, the biggest thing is they don't follow a diet, which I find fascinating because the internet wars on diet, like you mentioned, they're all about eating a very specific way, and I find it very encouraging as someone who like I just don't have the bandwidth in my life to follow a very strict diet. Everything's on the menu in my house, but I always try to make sure that we're getting a variety of foods in so that I'm eating a variety of nutrients throughout the week. I think there's a space for responsible supplementation. You don't need to throw the kitchen sink at yourself with every supplement under the sun, but there've been good studies on just even a simple multivitamin and then some basics like creatine, for example. So there's definitely a place for that. I think the most important thing for athletes who are training really hard. So like, look, if you're running 10 miles a week, you probably don't really need to think differently about your diet. If you're running 50 or 60 miles a week with 2 hard workouts a week and you're lifting weights, now all of a sudden there's a real demand for calories here. And so the number one consideration is not like micronutrients or anything like that. Is, are we getting the carbohydrate and the protein that we need to fuel and recover from our training. That, I think, is step number one, is making sure that the macros and total calories are being met. And if they are, then you can get into the weeds about, okay, well, I want to eat more healthy fat as opposed to saturated fat. I'm going to eliminate trans fats from my diet. I want to stop snacking on potato chips at the end of the day, and I'm going to do pretzels and hummus or whatever it might be. So there's lots of little changes that you can make, but I'm discovering that I'm quite agnostic about a lot of things when it comes to training. Let's just, focus on the whole foods, but really focus on the macros and the calories, because it might be hard to hit 4,000 calories a day if you're 100% plant-based. You might have some GI distress with the amount of fiber that you're getting in a diet like that. So that's where, some processed foods are going to be just fine. And I find, when I see like a pro runner eating a bacon cheeseburger and fries and they're having a beer, it is so like encouraging to me that you can be one of the best in the world. And it doesn't mean you have to be so strict with your diet that you're not allowing yourself to enjoy certain foods.
Okay, thanks for sharing. I gotta ask you, what are your non-negotiables for training athletes? Like, what do they need to do that they can't get away with if they're gonna finish this marathon?
Josh, I've been on many podcasts and no one has actually ever asked me that question. That's a really good one. A non-negotiable. Well, if you're training for a marathon, I would say the most important thing in your training is your long run. So the non-negotiable is doing a consistent long run every, I say every week, but there's going to be down weeks. It's fine to skip a week if you're feeling really, really beat up. But generally speaking, if you're taking care of yourself, you should be able to run a long run pretty much every week. The second non-negotiable to look at would be your overall training volume, especially for a marathoner. Let's just maybe constrain this advice to a marathoner.
Yeah.
Number one, most important thing is your long run. That's the non-negotiable. If you can't really build your long run past a certain level, you're probably never going to have a good time in the marathon. It's going to be painful. You're not going to even get close to what your potential is, what you can do over that distance. So let's start with that. And then overall volume. Mileage is better, but you can certainly supplement with cross training. So, the runners that get away with running a marathon off like 30 miles a week, they're the best candidates for dramatic improvement. If, say, over the course of a year, they could get their mileage into the mid to high 40s, for example. So mileage is really important. It's arguably the most important aspect of your training, period. Steven Seiler, one of the sport's best endurance physiologists, have said that it's the number one training need of endurance runners is your training volume. So he might disagree with me on the long run being the non-negotiable. He might say it's overall volume, but nevertheless, they're very similar they're very at the top of the list. I think on the other end of the spectrum is some type of speed development. Like we've got to be powerful athletes. We've got to be able to run very fast, to sprint. So I think something like strides, hill sprints, even like short repetitions, like say 200 meters on the track done at 800 meter to mile race pace, somewhere in there. If you've ever read Daniel's running formula, this will be an R workout or repetition workout. So you're building your aerobic fitness, you're building your capacity for endurance with the mileage and the long run, but then you're also working on speed and coordination and power output with that kind of work. You can get really far just by doing that. So if all you did, I haven't even talked about workouts. These aren't really workouts, maybe the repetition workouts, but they're kind of easy, they're fast, but you get a lot of recovery. So those would be probably the three non-negotiable things. And then of course, if you're a 2:45 marathoner, if you're quite talented, of course you have to run workouts. Of course, you've got to probably do some strength training. I'd love for you to sandwich your runs and get in that kind of work as well. cross training, just adding extra volume to your weekly mileage is probably a really good idea too. But you kind of get down the list and they start to become negotiable.
Okay. And what are your non-negotiables during the day, or what do you have to do every morning to feel satisfied, I guess, through
You
your
mean like
day?
for a workout or
Yeah,
outside of running?
through just like the way you live.
Yeah, I mean, I as someone who grew up running, I started as like a 14-year-old, and it's just been such a big part of my life for so long. Even though I'm not training hard or trying to like race fast anymore, I've got 3 kids. I'm in my 40s. My PRs, I'm never going to reset those. I really squeezed my 20s for all that they were worth. Um, I still feel compelled to train pretty much every day. So what's a non-negotiable for me personally is some kind of a workout. It doesn't necessarily have to be a run. I love to ride my bike. I love to go hiking. Um, I'll even throw on a weighted vest and just kind of, quickly walk around my neighborhood to get in a little evening stroll. Something like that gives me a little bit of satisfaction. I do like lifting weights now. I feel like the fatigue I get from that is very unique from running. And I'm learning about myself that I like to be fatigued from exercise. I like the heavy feelings in my legs. I like my muscles feeling sore and tight, like I'm kind of hobbling around. I feel like I've always been hobbling around, even when I was a teenager, like getting out of bed and limping for the first minute of my day. If I maybe that's the answer. If I'm not limping the beginning of my day, Josh, I'm probably not fully satisfied with my exercise protocol.
I gotcha. Okay, and what top three books would you recommend a runner to read? Besides your own book, of course, right?
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, I've got to recommend my performance training journal for any runner who wants to log their training in a kind of methodical way. But yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned Born to Run. I would not take to heart all of the recommendations for barefoot running, but it's such a good story. It's so well written. It made me just sort of fall in love with long distance running at a time when I was already in love with long distance running. So I do love that book. I'll give you a very niche recommendation that I guarantee nobody has read. It's called Why We Run by Bernd Heinrich. He was a University of Vermont professor who I believe in the 1980s went on to win the national 100K championship. And he's like a naturalist. He studies insects and birds. And the book is this weird combination of his training, his musings on running training theory, and how that relates to the natural world and how he learned from animals and how they use fuel and all that to get good at endurance. It's an interesting read, and I definitely recommend that. Let's see, another book. I wish I was looking at my running bookshelf, but that is upstairs. Probably my favorite training book of all time is Run Faster by Brad Hudson, co-written with Matt Fitzgerald, my brother from another mother. That book I really like. That's definitely a training book. It's physiology, it's workouts, it's how we structure training from the beginning to the end of a season and all that. How we build these capacities that help us run faster. So that's a really good book for like the mechanics of the training process. Whereas the other two are sort of like, let's just read about running and get excited about running.
Okay, and I want to be respectful of your time, so I know we're cutting it short here. So wanted to ask you one last question um, before we wrap up, and it's what I ask every one of my guests. So what's one thing someone listening can do today, not tomorrow, to improve their health?
Health or running performances?
Health.
Interesting. I would say start lifting weights. A lot of people are good at getting in a couple runs a week, especially people who might be listening to this podcast. They go for walks, they go on bike rides. They probably have adequate aerobic fitness, but most people aren't lifting weights. And look, I'm the guy who said earlier, I don't even love lifting weights. I'd rather be out there running. I'm a running coach. Despite all that, I really do think weightlifting is probably the best longevity exercise, uh, precisely because it like prevents you from succumbing to a lot of age related disasters like falling. Like, all of us are probably going to have to spend a couple of weeks in a hospital in our 70s and 80s. And the decline that happens when you are laying down for 3 weeks is like the fitness that you lose is monumental. And you're also going to lose a lot of body weight. This is what I'm worried about. Like if I'm a skinny runner and I go into the hospital for 2.5 weeks, I'm going to come out of that hospital visit incredibly frail. And you can just look up some of the rates of, like, you break your hip. What's the rate of decline after a long hospital stay for someone who's 84 years old? And it's not good. Weightlifting kind of provides a little bit of armor, a little bit of protection for some of those things that happen later in life. I also want more functionality when I'm older. I want to be able to lift my suitcase into the overhead bin. I want to be able to get down on the ground and play with my grandkids. I want to be able to, go on a walking tour of something when I'm 85 years old. And a lot of that has to do with, having balance, having mobility. You don't really get balance or mobility from running, but you do from weightlifting, especially if you're doing good weightlifting exercises. So that's probably the number one thing that I would recommend is, make it a habit now so that it's not hard to do when you're 60 or 70.
Yeah. Okay. And so how can someone get a hold of you if they want to use your coaching expertise or read your book? Can you let us know how to get a touch of you? I'm also going to leave everything in the show notes as well.
Yeah, well, strengthrunning.com is my home base. That's where you'll find info on everything from, the Strength Running podcast to the different training programs and books that I have. There's also coaching information if you want me to write you like a custom running plan for a goal that you have, or actual private coaching. And then, of course, there's the Strength Running podcast. If you listen to podcasts, if you want to learn how to become a better runner, that's always a good option.
All right. Thanks so much for joining in, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.